Welcome to a tour of Eco Risk Projector. So starting when you log into the application, you'll be presented with the Explore page in the root of your group. If you want to do account management related things, you can click on the profile icon in the top right and you can do things like switch between groups. For example, here, if I switch between these groups, in which case you'll see the Explore for the group you've switched to. You can also manage your account, so change your password and manage your groups. For example, remove and add users to the group, etc. At any time, if you click on the logo, you'll navigate back to the Explore page. So when you're on the Explore page, there's a lot of different things you can do. You can create folders, systems, and models. You can search through your folder systems and models. For example, here in demo, there's a lot of different things with demo in the name. You can edit, delete, copy, and move items, folders, models, and systems, and then you can also bulk do those things. So for more information about the Explore page and some examples of doing that, there's an Explore page video which I'd recommend checking out. So your usual use case would be, depending on the folder structure that your group is using, you might navigate into some subfolder, and then you might want to create a new folder for your work. So I'll just say this is test project, and for me I'm just creating this right in the root folder. Again, like you might have a folder for a certain work plan or a certain report, and then within that you might want to create a folder for the model you're going to investigate using. In any case, once you've created your folder, you can navigate to it by clicking on it. So within this Explorer, just simply click on anything to navigate to it, whether it's a folder, a model, or a system. Now, once you're in your new folder that you've created, you might want to then create a new system. You might also already have existing systems for what you're working on, just depending on how your workflow and what you're doing. If that's the case, there's no need to create a duplicate system. You could just simply use an existing system and run a model off that. But in the case you do want to create a new system, we can go ahead and say test system. We can give it a description. So this is a simple test system. We can also go ahead and add a scenario. So a scenario is a water use scenario. So it's effectively a version of water use. It's going to have data at locations. So for example, pre-development is very common scenario. Full entitlement or full use as well is very common. So for every scenario, we can give it a description. So whatever that might be, you could choose to use observed data, watch the observed data, or using a live data video for more details on how to do that. And then you need to specify a default. So in this case, we're going to say pre-development is our default, which is quite commonly what you'll do. Effectively, the default is just a way of specifying which scenario the application should use as like the initial setting, and it's also a way of allowing the application to infill data. So if you only upload data on your default scenario and then you don't have it on another scenario, it'll use the default scenario data. For example, if you're calculating an ARI, you may want to use default flow data, so pre-development flow data. So you'd specify that pre-development is your default, and then in the specific plugin you're using, there'll be an option to say use default data to calculate ARI. Anyway, now that we've created a scenario, we can add a location. Now, a location is effectively somewhere where you're going to have data. So often this will be a gauge, but it can be anything where you're going to have data. So for example, we'll go ahead and create a location called node1. The gauge number is specifically used if you're going to have the observed data, live data. This is how it'll fetch the relevant data. In this case, we're not doing that, so we can just leave it. So I go ahead and create that. I've now got one scenario and one location. Now you can go ahead and upload data to this. So you can browse by clicking the browse, or you can pull up a sample, pull up a file explorer, and in this case, I've got depth, flow, and rainfall. Might also pick temperature as well, for example. And once you have the selection, it can be just one file or many. you can just simply drag and drop onto the box for the specific location and scenario you want to upload it, and it'll upload all the files you've dragged and dropped on. So once you've uploaded the data, you're going to want to specify the type. Now, you could leave a file in here without selecting the type. For example, leave that last, I think it was temperature, and it still exists, but you need to tell it what data type it is for an application or for a plugin to be able to use it. So once I go through and do that, I've now got this set up. You can download and delete these files. You can edit the node, edit the scenario, etc. In this case, I'm not going to get too much into that. You can also preview the data. Now there's a lot of different options in here and ways of using this to compare. Again, there's specific videos on this tool, the preview data tool, which I'd recommend watching if you want more information. It's also about observed data if you want to know about that, and also just the general locations and scenarios. There's videos specifically on them and what they are and how they interact. But now that we've created this simple test system, we can go back to the Explorer and we can use it with a model. So we can then create a model. We'll call this test model. So you give it a name, you can provide a whole bunch of metadata that will be stored. You can add attachments. So this is important if you're using this model for some reporting and you want to attach documentation, for example. Anyway, once you've created, you've created your model, you've given it a name, you come through to the settings. This is where you're going to specify the plugin, which is, in our case, we'll go ahead and just use Ambassador's Glassfish. So there's currently 30 plugins, but this number grows quite frequently, and you can select any of them. They all have specific parameters, which are generated based on the plugin, along with default values. So when I click Ambassadors, these are the parameters. You've got these different sections and these different internal parameters. If I was to then go to something else like Australian Bass, we've got a whole different set of parameters. Now, whatever you select, you're going to get default values. So effectively, the model settings tab is the defaults. So when you then add a system, this is the default value, which you can overwrite at each location. But overall, you want to set these as your generic values so that you don't want to have to overwrite too many of them. And you also have assessment. So this will almost every plugin will have some assessment. This is used to inform the explore page. And for more information though on parameters and assessment, there are specific videos, and also for more information on any individual plugin, there's documentation on the website under models, and there's also a video demonstrating each individual plugin. So once you've set up your model, you've selected a plugin, you might want to modify these. So for example, I could say, actually, we want to use flow threshold, or I could say, no, we go back to use medium flow. Then we come into location and we want to select a system. So all the different systems that exist in your group will come up here. In this case, I want to use test system, which I just created. So we only created one location, node 1, so we're going to enable it. And also if you click on it, you expand and you can see the individual parameters. So this is where you might want to update your location specific parameters. For example, node 1 might actually, yes, use a flow threshold, and I know what that is at that one location. Whereas if I had a second node, node 2, maybe I just want to use a median flow. In this case, I'll just keep it all the same, keep it as a default, and I can go ahead and run. So you got to select which scenarios you want to run for. In this case, we only created pre-development, so that's all we have, and I'll run it. Additionally, I'm not going to specify a run period. I'm just going to use all of the data. So that's completed. And then if we come to explore, we can see an explore page showing our results. So we've got our single scenario. Again, it's the default, so that's why it's the baseline. We only have one scenario, so we can't really see, and there's nothing to show in terms of percent change, but we can see pre-development had 90.9% low risk years, 9.1% high risk years, and that's the same at node 1. We only had one node, so that makes sense. And then if we go to opportunities, you can see that we had mostly low risk and then 1 year of high risk at the end. This is likely because we didn't have a complete year of data here. but that's just theory. And you can adjust down to see different periods as well through the slider at the top.